Captain Elena Vasquez had been flying helicopters for the United States Army for 9 years, but she had never been asked to do the impossible. Until today. The operations center at Forward Operating Base Hammer in eastern Afghanistan was barely larger than a shipping container. Metal walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the constant hum of generators created a claustrophobic atmosphere that matched the tension in the room. Elena stood with her arms crossed, staring at the map on the wall while her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Brennan, explained why she couldn't fly. "The weather's deteriorating by the minute," Brennan said, gesturing at the satellite imagery on the screen. "Visibility is dropping below minimums. The mountain passes are socked in with clouds. We've got reports of heavy turbulence and icing conditions above 8,000 feet. Elena studied the map. 20 miles to the northeast, in the Kunar Valley, 280 American soldiers were surrounded by Taliban fighters. They had been on patrol when they walked into an ambush. Now they were trapped on a ridgeline with their backs to a cliff, running low on ammunition and taking casualties. They needed evacuation. They needed it now. "Sir, if we don't get those soldiers out tonight, they won't last until morning," Elena said quietly. "The intel says the Taliban is bringing in reinforcements. By dawn, our guys will be completely overrun." "I understand that, Captain," Brennan replied, his voice tight with frustration. "But I can't authorize a medevac flight in these conditions. It's a death sentence. You'd never make it through the mountains. We have to try." "No." Brennan's tone was final. "I'm grounding all aircraft until the weather clears." "That's an order." Elena felt her jaw clench. She looked at the map again, at the small red circle that represented 280 American lives hanging in the balance. Her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Webb, stood beside her. Webb was a quiet man from Georgia, 42 years old, with a wife and 3 kids back home. He had flown with Elena for 2 years, and they had developed the kind of wordless understanding that only came from countless hours in the cockpit, together. Webb met her eyes and gave an almost imperceptible nod. He was thinking the same thing she was. "Understood?" "Sir," Elena said to Brennan. "We'll stand down." Elena had grown up in San Antonio, Texas, the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. Her father had immigrated from Mexico when he was 16, worked 3 jobs to put himself through technical school, and eventually opened his own auto repair shop. Her mother had taught 5th grade for 30 years. They had raised Elena and her 2 brothers to believe in hard work, integrity, and standing up for what was right even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. Elena had joined the Army at 22, after graduating from the University of Texas with a degree in aerospace engineering. She could have taken a comfortable job with a defense contractor, made good money, lived a safe life. But Elena hadn't wanted safe. She had wanted to serve. Flight school had been grueling. She was one of only 3 women in her class, and the instructors pushed her harder than anyone else. They were testing her, she knew, trying to see if she would break. She didn't break. She graduated 2nd in her class and was assigned to fly UH-60 Black Hawks. She had deployed to Afghanistan 3 times, accumulating over 1,500 flight hours in combat zones. She had flown missions in sandstorms at night under fire. She had evacuated wounded soldiers, delivered supplies to remote outposts, and inserted Special Forces teams deep into enemy territory. She was good at her job. Maybe the best, but she had never disobeyed a direct order until tonight. It was 0100 hours when Elena and Webb met in the hangar. The wind outside howled like a wounded animal and rain hammered against the metal roof. The weather had gotten worse, just as Brennan had predicted. Their Black Hawk sat in the center of the hangar, its rotor blades tied down, its fuselage gleaming under the harsh lights. The crew chief, Sergeant First Class David Kim, was doing routine maintenance checks. Kim looked up as Elena approached. He was a Korean-American kid from Los Angeles, 28 years old with quick hands and an encyclopedic knowledge of helicopter systems. "Captain," Kim said, wiping grease off his hands. "What are you doing here?" "I thought all flights were grounded." "They are," Elena said. "Which is why you didn't see us here?" "Understood." Kim's expression shifted from confusion to comprehension. "Captain, are you serious? In this weather?" "Those soldiers don't have until morning," Elena said simply. We're their only chance. Webb was already conducting the pre-flight inspection, running his hands over the airframe, checking for any signs of damage or mechanical issues. He worked methodically, professionally, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Kim hesitated, then nodded. All right. Give me 10 minutes to finish the checks and fuel her up. But, Captain, this is crazy. You know that, right? I know, Elena said. But sometimes crazy is all we've got. 20 minutes later, Elena sat in the pilot's seat while Webb occupied the co-pilot position to her right. The instrument panel glowed in the darkness, dozens of dials and digital readouts providing information about the aircraft's systems. Elena keyed her radio to the tower frequency. Tower, this is Dustoff 37 requesting clearance for takeoff. There was a long pause. Then the tower controller's voice came back, uncertain. Dustoff 37, all flights are grounded due to weather. You are not cleared for takeoff. Tower, we have an emergency medevac mission. 280 soldiers in contact, multiple casualties. We're going. Another pause, longer this time. Dustoff 37, stand by. Elena didn't stand by. She released the rotor brake and increased collective pitch. The Black Hawk lifted off the ground, its engines roaring. Dustoff 37, you are not cleared. Return to the ground immediately. Tower, we're committed, Elena said calmly. Alert Colonel Brennan that we've launched. Tell him we'll face the consequences when we get back. She switched off the radio before the tower could respond. Webb looked at her. You just ended your career, you know that? If we don't do this, I don't deserve to have a career, Elena replied. She pushed the cyclic forward, and the Black Hawk accelerated into the storm. The weather was even worse than the reports had suggested. The moment they cleared the base perimeter, the helicopter was buffeted by wind gusts that felt like giant hands trying to swat them from the sky. Rain lashed the windscreen, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Elena flew on instruments, trusting her training and her instincts. The Black Hawk shuddered and bucked as they climbed toward the mountains. Airspeed 120 knots, Webb called out, his voice steady. Altitude 4,000 feet. We need to climb to at least 8,000 to clear the ridgeline. Copy, Elena said, pulling more collective. The engines strained as the helicopter climbed. At 6,000 feet, they entered the clouds. The world disappeared, replaced by a gray void. Elena focused on the instruments, on the artificial horizon that told her which way was up, on the altimeter that showed their height above the ground. Picking up ice? Webb said, pointing to the temperature gauge. We're in icing conditions. Ice accumulation was every helicopter pilot's nightmare. Ice added weight, disrupted airflow over the rotor blades, and could cause a loss of lift. In severe cases, it could bring a helicopter down. I see it, Elena said. Keep monitoring. If it gets worse, we'll have to find warmer air. At 7,000 feet, the turbulence intensified. The Black Hawk dropped suddenly, falling 100 feet in seconds before Elena could arrest the descent. Her stomach lurched, but her hands remained steady on the controls. Come on, girl, she murmured to the helicopter. Stay with me. They climbed through 8,000 feet and broke out of the clouds. The moon appeared overhead, bright and cold, illuminating the mountain peaks around them. The ridgeline they needed to cross was directly ahead, a black silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. We're not going to clear it, Webb said, studying the terrain display. We need another 500 feet at least. Elena was already scanning for alternatives. To the left, a narrow valley cut through the mountains. It would take them off course, add precious minutes to their flight time, but it might be their only option. She banked the helicopter left. We'll take the valley. It's going to be tight. How tight? Webb asked. Very. The valley walls rose up on either side of them, dark and menacing. Elena descended slightly, following the terrain, her eyes flicking constantly between the windscreen and the instruments. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and they would fly into a mountainside. Width of the valley is narrowing, Webb said. Rotor clearance is going to be less than 50 feet on each side. I know, Elena said. Her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She flew with absolute precision, making tiny adjustments to keep the helicopter centered in the valley. The rock walls seemed close enough to touch. The rotor wash echoed back at them, creating a disorienting acoustic effect. Behind her, in the cargo compartment, Sergeant Kim was strapped into his seat, gripping the webbing so hard his knuckles were white. He had flown dozens of missions with Elena, but never anything like this. They were threading a needle in a hurricane, and one wrong move would kill them all. But Elena didn't make wrong moves. After what felt like an eternity, the valley widened and they emerged on the other side of the mountain range. The terrain ahead dropped away, revealing the Kunar Valley spread out below them. "There," Webb said, pointing to a series of muzzle flashes on a ridgeline 3 miles ahead. "That's them." Elena could see it now. Tracers arcing through the darkness. The bright flashes of explosions. The scattered fires where mortar rounds had impacted. 280 American soldiers were down there, fighting for their lives, and she was about to drop into the middle of it. Elena keyed her radio to the ground frequency. "Ironside 2-1, this is Dustoff 3-7, inbound your position for emergency extraction." The response came immediately, a voice tight with stress and disbelief. "Dustoff 3-7, this is Ironside 2-1 actual. Did you say you're inbound? How the hell did you get clearance to fly in this weather?" "We didn't," Elena said simply. "What's your situation?" There was a pause. "We've got 280 personnel surrounded on a ridgeline. 37 wounded, including 5 critical. Taliban forces have us boxed in on 3 sides. The only way out is the cliff behind us, and it's a 400-foot drop. We're down to our last magazines. If you can get us out, now is the time." Elena could hear the exhaustion and desperation in the ground commander's voice. These soldiers had been fighting all night. They were out of options. "Ironside, I'm going to need a landing zone. What have you got?" "The only flat ground is a rocky outcrop about 50 meters square. It's exposed, and we're taking fire from multiple directions. I can't guarantee your safety." "I didn't come here for safety," Elena said. "Mark the LZ with IR strobes. We're 2 minutes out." She descended toward the ridgeline, scanning for threats. Below, she could see muzzle flashes from Taliban positions on the hillsides. They were pouring fire onto the American position, and that fire would soon be directed at her helicopter. "Webb, get on the minigun," Elena ordered. "Kim, prep the cabin for wounded. We're going to load as fast as we can and get out." "Yes, ma'am," both men replied. The LZ came into view, marked by the flickering infrared strobes that were only visible through their night vision goggles. It was smaller than Elena had hoped, surrounded by boulders and at the edge of a cliff. This was going to be tricky. She brought the Black Hawk into a hover over the LZ, fighting the wind that tried to push them toward the cliff. The helicopter rocked and swayed as she made micro-adjustments to keep it stable. "Dustoff 3-7 is on the ground," she said into the radio. "Start loading wounded." Part 2. Under Fire. The moment the Black Hawk's wheels touched the rocky ground, bullets began pinging off the fuselage. The Taliban had spotted them immediately and were concentrating their fire on the helicopter. Through her night vision goggles, Elena could see American soldiers running toward the aircraft, carrying their wounded comrades. Some of the soldiers were limping, bleeding from their own injuries, but refusing to stop. Webb opened up with the minigun, the weapon's distinctive buzz cutting through the night. Tracers arced out toward the Taliban positions, suppressing their fire momentarily. Sergeant Kim had opened the cargo doors and was helping load the wounded. "Come on, let's go!" he shouted over the roar of the engines and the crack of gunfire. "Wounded first, then everyone else." Elena held the helicopter steady, feeling every impact as bullets struck the aircraft. She monitored the engine gauges, watching for any sign of critical damage. So far, nothing vital had been hit, but their luck couldn't hold forever. The first wounded soldier was a young private, maybe 20 years old, with a field dressing wrapped around his abdomen. His face was pale, his eyes glassy with shock. 2 soldiers carried him into the Black Hawk and laid him on the floor of the cargo compartment. Then another wounded soldier. "And another? How many can we take?" The ground commander shouted at Kim. "Standard capacity is 11 passengers," Kim shouted back. "But in an emergency, we can cram in more." "We'll take as many as we can." More soldiers poured into the Black Hawk, the wounded first, then those helping carry them. The cargo compartment filled rapidly. Soldiers sitting shoulder to shoulder, some standing, all of them pressed together. Elena watched the weight indicator climbing. The Black Hawk had a maximum gross weight limit. Exceed it, and the helicopter wouldn't be able to take off, especially in these thin mountain air conditions. "Kim, how many do we have?" Elena called over the intercom. 38, ma'am. We're at max capacity, 38, out of 280. That meant they would need to make at least 7 more trips, 7 trips through the storm, 7 landings under fire, 7 takeoffs from this impossible landing zone. Elena didn't hesitate. "Strap them in and tell them to hold on. We're lifting off." She increased collective pitch, and the Black Hawk strained against its load. The engine screamed as she pulled more power. The helicopter lifted off the ground, sluggish and heavy. An RPG streaked past the cockpit, missing them by meters. Webb tracked it back to its source and opened fire with the minigun again. "Jesus!" Webb muttered. "That was too close." Elena banked the helicopter hard, putting as much distance as possible between them and the Taliban positions. She flew low and fast, using the terrain to mask their movement. Behind her, in the cargo compartment, 38 soldiers held on for dear life. Some were praying. Some were crying. All of them were grateful to be alive. The flight back to FOB Hammer took 20 minutes. By the time Elena set the Black Hawk down, emergency medical crews were already waiting. They rushed forward to unload the wounded, moving with practiced efficiency. Colonel Brennan was there too, his face dark with anger. Elena shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit. Her legs were shaky, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the cold. Brennan strode over to her. "Captain Vasquez, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "My job, sir," Elena said calmly. "You disobeyed a direct order. You took off without clearance. You put your crew at risk." "I saved 38 lives," Elena interrupted. "And there are 242 more soldiers still out there who need extraction. So with respect, sir, we can have this conversation later. Right now, I need to refuel and go back." Brennan stared at her, his jaw working. For a moment, she thought he might place her under arrest right there. Then one of the wounded soldiers, the young private with the abdominal wound, spoke up from his stretcher. "Sir, she saved us. We were dead if she hadn't come. She flew through hell to get to us." Another soldier, a sergeant with his arm in a makeshift sling, nodded. "That pilot's got more guts than anyone I've ever met. She didn't have to come, but she did." Brennan looked at the wounded soldiers, then back at Elena. His expression softened slightly. "How many more trips?" he asked. "At least 7, sir. Maybe 8, depending on how many we can fit each time." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "All right, refuel and go back. But Vasquez, you make it through this and we're going to have a serious talk about following orders." "Yes." "Sir?" Elena said. She turned back to her helicopter, where Webb and Kim were already conducting a quick maintenance check and refueling. "Bullet holes in the tail section," Kim reported. "Nothing critical. Hydraulics are good, engines are good. She'll fly." "Then let's go," Elena said. The second trip was worse than the first. The Taliban had reinforced their positions and brought in heavier weapons. As Elena approached the LZ, they opened up with a DSHK heavy machine gun, 50 caliber rounds that could tear through the Black Hawk's armor. Webb returned fire with the minigun, but the Taliban gunner was well protected behind a rock wall. Elena had to fly a series of evasive maneuvers, jinking left and right, climbing and descending, to avoid the incoming fire. When she finally touched down on the LZ, the American soldiers were ready. They loaded 42 people this time, packing the cargo compartment so full that some soldiers had to ride with their legs hanging out the doors. The takeoff was even more difficult. The helicopter was dangerously overloaded, and Elena had to use every bit of power the engines could provide. The Black Hawk clawed its way into the air, struggling, but it made it. On the flight back, one of the soldiers in the cargo compartment started singing. "Amazing Grace," his voice rough but steady. One by one, the others joined in. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. There was no time for emotion. Not yet. Third trip. 39 soldiers extracted. The weather was getting worse again, clouds rolling back in, visibility dropping. Fourth trip. 41 soldiers. The Black Hawk took more hits, including one that punctured a fuel tank. They made it back to base, but the aircraft was leaking fuel. We need to switch birds, Kim said as they landed. This one's not safe to fly anymore, but there was no other helicopter available. The other Blackhawks at Fobhammer were already on missions or undergoing maintenance. Patch the fuel tank, Elena ordered. Make it work. Kim looked at her like she was crazy. Captain, I can patch it, but it's not going to hold for long. One more hit in that area, and we'll lose all our fuel. Then we won't get hit in that area, Elena said. 5th trip, 35 soldiers. The Taliban had figured out the pattern now and were waiting for them. The moment Elena approached the LZ, they opened up with everything they had. An RPG hit the tail rotor, causing the helicopter to spin violently. Elena fought the controls, using the pedals and cyclic to stabilize the aircraft. Somehow, impossibly, she managed to land. Tail rotor is damaged, Webb reported, his voice tight. We've lost about 40% effectiveness. Can we still fly? Elena asked. Maybe, but it's going to be a rough ride. The soldiers loaded anyway, knowing this might be their last chance. 43 men crammed into the Blackhawk, so tightly packed they could barely breathe. Elena lifted off, and the helicopter immediately began to yaw to the right, spinning because of the damaged tail rotor. She compensated with the pedals, but it took all her strength to keep the aircraft under control. The flight back was a nightmare. The Blackhawk wanted to spin, and Elena had to fight it every second of the way. Her legs were cramping, her arms aching, sweat pouring down her face, but she got them home. When they landed, Kim inspected the tail rotor and shook his head. Captain, this bird is done. We can't fly it again. Not safely. Elena looked at the damaged helicopter, then at the map. How many soldiers are still out there? Webb did the math. About 60. Maybe 65. 2 more trips. That's all they needed. Elena turned to Brennan, who had been watching the operations in silence. Sir, I need another aircraft. Brennan shook his head. There aren't any available. I'm sorry, Vasquez, but you've done all you can. We'll have to send ground forces to extract the rest at first light. They won't last until first light, Elena said. The Taliban is closing in. Those soldiers need extraction now. I don't have another helicopter to give you. Elena was about to argue when a voice called out from across the flight line. I've got one. They turned to see Chief Warrant Officer 4, John Hammer Harrison, walking toward them. Harrison was a legend among Army aviators, a 52-year-old pilot who had been flying helicopters since before Elena was born. He had flown in Desert Storm, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He had more combat hours than anyone else on the base. He was also supposed to be off-duty. Hammer, what are you doing here? Brennan asked. I heard what Captain Vasquez was doing, Harrison said. Heard she's been making impossible flights all night to save our boys. Thought she might need a co-pilot with a few more years of experience. Elena felt her throat tighten. Sir, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, Harrison said with a grin. I'm volunteering. Besides, my bird is fueled and ready. And unlike yours, it doesn't have holes in it. Brennan looked at Harrison, then at Elena. You're both out of your minds. Probably, Harrison agreed. But those soldiers need us. So what do you say, Colonel? You going to let us finish the job? Brennan rubbed his face with both hands. Fine, but this is the last time. 2 more trips and then you're both grounded, permanently. Clear? Crystal clear, sir, Elena said. Part 3. The final run Harrison's Black Hawk was older than Elena's but well-maintained. The crew chief, a staff sergeant named Rodriguez, had kept it in perfect condition. She's a good bird, Harrison said, as they conducted the pre-flight. Flew her through 3 deployments. Never let me down yet. Elena settled into the co-pilot seat this time, deferring to Harrison's experience. Webb and Kim climbed aboard as well, refusing to be left behind. You boys didn't have to come, Elena said. With respect, ma'am, Kim replied. Yes, we did. The flight to the LZ was tense but uneventful. The weather had cleared slightly, giving them better visibility. Harrison flew with the easy confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. You did good work tonight, Captain, Harrison said over the intercom. Saved a lot of lives. But I have to ask, why'd you do it? Why'd you risk your career, your life, everything for this? Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question. Then she said, When I was in flight school, my instructor told me something I never forgot. He said, "The Army will teach you to fly, but only you can decide what kind of pilot you're going to be. You can be the kind who follows orders and plays it safe, or you can be the kind who does what's right even when it's hard. I decided a long time ago what kind of pilot I wanted to be." Harrison smiled. "Your instructor was a smart man." "He was," Elena said. "He died in Iraq, flying a mission to extract wounded Marines. Flew into a hot LZ when everyone told him it was too dangerous. Saved 15 lives before an RPG took him down." "What was his name?" "Captain James Harrison," Elena said quietly. "He was my mentor, and I believe he was your son." Harrison's hands tightened on the controls. He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Jamie, yeah, that was my boy. He was a hell of a pilot. He taught me everything I know," Elena said, "and he would have been proud of what we're doing tonight." "Yeah," Harrison said softly. "He would have been." They reached the LZ to find the American soldiers in desperate straits. The Taliban had pushed in close, and the two sides were exchanging fire at point-blank range. Bodies lay scattered across the rocky ground, both American and enemy. The ground commander's voice came over the radio, urgent and strained. "Dust off, we're getting overrun. We need extraction right now." Harrison brought the Black Hawk in fast and low. Before they even touched down, Taliban fighters opened fire from multiple positions. Bullets struck the fuselage like deadly hail. Webb and Kim opened up with their weapons, laying down suppressive fire. On the ground, American soldiers provided cover, shooting at every Taliban position they could identify. Harrison set the Black Hawk down hard, the wheels slamming onto the rocky surface. "Load 'em up," he shouted. Soldiers poured toward the helicopter. Many were wounded, limping or being carried by their comrades. They moved with the desperate speed of men who knew this was their last chance. Elena counted them as they loaded: 20, 25, 30. An RPG streaked toward them. Webb tracked it with the minigun and managed to hit the Taliban fighter before he could fire a second round. 35, 40, that's all of them, the ground commander shouted, climbing aboard last. "Go, go, go!" Harrison pulled collective, but the helicopter didn't lift. They were too heavy, the altitude too high, the air too thin. "We're overloaded," he said grimly. "We need to lighten the load." "No," Elena said firmly. "We're not leaving anyone behind." "Give it full power. If I do that, we might burn out the engines. Then burn them out," Elena snapped. "We're taking everyone." Harrison looked at her, saw the determination in her eyes, and nodded. "All right." "Hold on back there. This is going to be rough." He pulled maximum power, and the engines screamed in protest. The helicopter shuddered, struggled, but slowly, painfully slowly, began to rise. They were 3 feet off the ground when the RPG hit. It struck the tail section, exploding with a flash of light and heat. The Black Hawk lurched violently, the tail rotor disintegrating in a shower of metal fragments. Harrison fought the controls, but without the tail rotor, the helicopter began to spin. They were going to crash. Elena's training took over. "I've got the controls!" she shouted. She had been in this situation before in a simulator. Loss of tail rotor. The helicopter wanted to spin because of torque from the main rotor, but if she could touch down before they built up too much rotational speed, they might survive. She cut the throttle and let the helicopter fall, controlling the descent with the collective. They hit the ground hard, the landing gear collapsing, the fuselage scraping across the rocky surface. Metal shrieked. Sparks flew. Soldiers were thrown against each other, but they were down. "They were alive! Everybody out!" Elena shouted. "Move, move, move!" Soldiers scrambled from the wrecked helicopter. Harrison and Elena helped the wounded, dragging them clear of the aircraft. Kim and Webb provided cover, firing at Taliban fighters who were advancing on their position. "We're pinned down," Harrison said, assessing their situation. "The Taliban has us surrounded. Without air support, we're not getting out of here." Elena looked at the sky. Dawn was breaking on the horizon, painting the clouds pink and gold. Beautiful and useless. Then she heard it. A sound that made her heart leap, the distinctive whop, whop, whop of helicopter rotors. She looked up and saw 3 Black Hawks approaching from the west, flying in formation. Behind them came two Apache attack helicopters, their weapons systems tracking targets on the ground. The lead Black Hawk broke formation and landed near their position. The side door opened, and Colonel Brennan leaned out. "Need a ride, Captain?" he shouted over the rotor noise. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. She had never been so happy to see her commanding officer. "Yes, sir," she shouted back. "We definitely need a ride." The extraction took 15 minutes. The three Black Hawks ferried all the soldiers back to Fob Hammer, while the Apaches kept the Taliban pinned down with rockets and cannon fire. When Elena's helicopter touched down at the base, there were hundreds of people waiting. Soldiers, medical staff, support personnel. They had heard about the mission, about the female pilot who had defied orders to save 280 surrounded soldiers. As Elena climbed out of the helicopter, exhausted and filthy, the crowd began to applaud. It started with a few people, then spread until everyone was clapping, cheering, some of them crying. The soldiers she had rescued formed a corridor, standing at attention, saluting as she walked past. Elena saluted back, her hand trembling with fatigue and emotion. At the end of the corridor stood Colonel Brennan. His expression was stern, but there was something else in his eyes. "Respect, Captain Vasquez," he said formally. "We need to talk." "Yes, sir," Elena replied. Brennan led her to a quiet area away from the crowd. For a moment, he just looked at her, shaking his head. "You know I should court-martial you," he said. "You disobeyed a direct order. You took unauthorized flights into a combat zone. You violated about a dozen regulations." "I know, sir." "But," Brennan paused, "you also saved 280 American lives. You flew 7 missions through the worst weather conditions I've ever seen. You took damage, kept flying, and didn't quit until every last soldier was safe." He extended his hand. "That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. I was wrong to ground the aircraft. You were right to defy me." Elena shook his hand, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Brennan said. "Word of what you did is already spreading up the chain of command. General Mackenzie wants to see you. So does the division commander. You're either going to be court-martialed or decorated." "Maybe both." Elena smiled tiredly. "At this point, sir, I'll take either one. As long as those soldiers made it home." "They did. Because of you." Brennan's expression softened. "Get some rest, Captain. You've earned it." Elena slept for 14 hours straight, so exhausted she didn't even dream. When she finally woke, it was late afternoon the following day. There was a message waiting for her. "Report to the base commander's office at 1700 hours. When she arrived, she found not only Colonel Brennan, but also Lieutenant General Marcus Mackenzie, the commanding general of all U.S. forces in Afghanistan. He was a stern-looking man in his late 50s with gray hair and intense blue eyes. "Captain Vasquez," General Mackenzie said, rising to shake her hand. "Please have a seat." Elena sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been reviewing the after-action reports from your mission," Mackenzie said. 7 flights through severe weather, multiple aircraft damaged, and 280 soldiers rescued. It's a remarkable story. "Thank you, sir. However," Mackenzie continued, "you did disobey a direct order from your commanding officer. That's a serious breach of military discipline. Colonel Brennan had legitimate reasons for grounding aircraft, and you chose to ignore those reasons." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir, I did. And I'd do it again." Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Sir, those soldiers needed help. They needed it immediately. The regulations are important, and I respect them. But sometimes following regulations means people die. Sometimes you have to make a choice between doing what's safe and doing what's right. I chose what was right." The general studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Captain Vasquez, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Additionally, I'm putting you in for promotion to major. The Army needs officers who know when to follow orders and when to use their own judgment. You demonstrated exceptional judgment under impossible circumstances." Elena felt her throat tighten. "Sir, Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet," Mackenzie said, "because I'm also assigning you to a new position. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment has requested you specifically. They need pilots who can fly the impossible missions. Interested?" The 160th SOAR, The Night Stalkers, the most elite helicopter unit in the world. Yes, sir, Elena said without hesitation. Very interested. Good. Report to Fort Campbell in 30 days. Mackenzie stood and offered his hand again. Congratulations, Captain. What you did out there, that's what heroism looks like. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in a ceremony hall at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The room was packed with soldiers, officers, and media representatives. Her parents sat in the front row, her father in his best suit. Her mother crying tears of pride. Chief Warrant Officer Harrison stood beside her, also receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross. Webb and Kim were being awarded the Air Medal for their roles in the mission. The division commander, a 2-star general, pinned the medal to Elena's uniform and read the citation aloud. For extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight. Captain Elena Vasquez voluntarily flew 7 combat missions through severe weather conditions to rescue 280. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. Elena stood at attention, overwhelmed by the moment. After the ceremony, the soldiers she had rescued lined up to shake her hand. Many of them were still recovering from their wounds, some on crutches, some with arms in slings. The young private she had evacuated first came forward. His name was Tyler Henderson, and he was from a small town in Iowa. He had survived his abdominal wound and was recovering well. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I just wanted to say thank you. You saved my life. You saved all our lives. I'll never forget what you did for us." Elena shook his hand. "You're welcome, Private. Just doing my job. It was more than that, ma'am. You risked everything for us. That's not just doing your job. That's something special." One by one, the soldiers thanked her. Some shook her hand. Some saluted. Some hugged her, crying as they told her how they had given up hope, how they had thought they were going to die on that ridgeline, how her helicopter appearing out of the storm had seemed like a miracle. Elena listened to each story, memorized each face. These were the lives she had saved. These were the reasons she had defied orders. After the soldiers, her parents came forward. Her father embraced her tightly, whispering in Spanish that he was proud of her. Her mother just held her and cried. "You scared me," her mother said. "When they told me what you did, I was so scared." "I'm sorry, Mama," Elena said. "Don't be sorry. Be careful. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise." That evening, there was a reception at the officers' club. Elena didn't particularly want to attend. She was tired of being the center of attention, but Colonel Brennan insisted. "You're a hero now." "Vasquez," he said. "Might as well get used to it." At the reception, Elena was approached by a woman in a civilian suit. She introduced herself as Jennifer Marcus, a reporter for the Army Times. "Captain Vasquez, I'm writing a story about your mission," Marcus said. "I was hoping to interview you." Elena hesitated. "I'm not sure there's much to say. I did my job." "You did more than your job," Marcus said gently. "You saved 280 lives. You became the first woman to fly combat rescue missions through Category 5 weather conditions. You defied orders because you knew it was the right thing to do. That's a story people need to hear." Elena considered this. Then she said, "All right, but on one condition." "What's that?" "Don't make it about me being a woman. Make it about pilots doing what pilots do, flying missions to save lives." Marcus smiled. "Deal." The interview was published 2 weeks later. It was picked up by major news outlets across the country. Elena's photo appeared on the front page of newspapers. On television news programs, on military websites, she became, much to her embarrassment, famous. She received letters from children saying they wanted to be pilots like her. She received letters from veterans thanking her for her service. She received letters from women saying she had inspired them to pursue careers in the military. One letter, however, stood out from all the others. It was from the wife of one of the soldiers she had rescued. Her husband, Sergeant First Class Robert Torres, had been critically wounded during the ambush. He had been one of the first soldiers Elena had evacuated. The letter read, "Dear Captain Vasquez, I wanted to write to tell you what your actions meant to my family. My husband, Robert, was severely wounded during the ambush in the Kunar Valley. The doctors told me later that if he hadn't received medical attention within the hour, he would have died. You got him out in 30 minutes. Robert is recovering now. He'll need months of physical therapy, but he's going to be okay. He's going to come home to me and our 3 children. We're going to have a life together, a future, because of you. Surrounded soldiers. Despite heavy enemy fire, mechanical failures, and extreme risk to her own life, Captain Vasquez refused to abandon her mission until every soldier was safely extracted. Her courage, skill, and selfless devotion to duty reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Army. I can never repay what you did, but I want you to know that every day, when I wake up next to my husband, when I see my children playing with their father, I'll think of you. You're not just a hero to my husband and the soldiers you rescued. You're a hero to all of us who love them. Thank you for bringing him home to us. With eternal gratitude, Maria Torres Elena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why she had become a pilot. This was why she had defied orders. Not for medals or recognition, but for moments like this. For families who would stay whole. For children who would grow up with their fathers. For wives who wouldn't have to bury their husbands. She carefully folded the letter and placed it in her footlocker. Next to the medal she had received, 6 months later, Elena stood in front of a flight simulator at Fort Campbell. She was now Major Elena Vasquez, assigned to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She was training a new class of pilots, teaching them advanced techniques for flying in adverse conditions. One of her students raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you once flew 7 missions through a Category 5 storm to rescue surrounded soldiers?" Elena smiled. "It's true. How did you do it? How did you stay calm when everything was going wrong?" Elena thought about the question. She thought about that night, about the fear and the uncertainty, about the moments when she thought they might not make it. "I stayed calm because I remembered why I was flying," she said. "It wasn't about the storm or the danger or the damaged aircraft. It was about 280 soldiers who needed help. When you focus on the mission, on the people depending on you, the fear becomes manageable. It's still there, but it doesn't control you anymore." Another student spoke up. "Ma'am, you defied orders to fly that mission. How did you know it was the right decision?" "I didn't," Elena admitted. "Not for certain. But I knew that if I didn't try, those soldiers would die, and I knew I would have to live with that decision for the rest of my life. Sometimes in the military, we're asked to make impossible choices. The key is to make the choice you can live with. The choice that aligns with your values and your commitment to the soldiers beside you." The students nodded, absorbing her words. "Now," Elena said, gesturing to the simulator, "let's see if you can handle some adverse weather conditions. Who wants to go first?" That evening, Elena sat in her quarters writing in a journal she had started keeping. She wrote about her students, about the missions she was training for, about the life she was building. She wrote about the night that had changed everything, the night she had defied orders to save 280 soldiers. She had been called a hero. She had been given medals and promotions. But when she looked back on that night, she didn't see heroism. She saw a pilot doing her job. She saw a soldier keeping faith with the most fundamental promise of military service: to leave no one behind. She saw a woman making the choice between what was safe and what was right, and choosing right. The medal on her wall was nice. The recognition was appreciated. But the real reward was in the letters she received, in the families who were whole, in the soldiers who had come home. That was enough. That was everything. Elena closed her journal and looked out the window. Somewhere in the darkness, other pilots were flying missions. Other soldiers were in danger. Other people were making impossible choices. And if she was ever called upon to make that choice again, to defy orders, to risk everything, to do what was right instead of what was safe, she knew exactly what she would do. She would fly. Because that's what pilots do. 5 years later, Elena stood on a stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. She was one of several women being honored for their contributions to military service. The presenter read her citation. "Major Elena Vasquez exemplifies the highest standards of courage, leadership, and dedication. On the night of October 15th, she made a decision that saved 280 American lives. She flew through impossible weather, sustained multiple battle damage incidents, and refused to quit until every soldier was safely evacuated. Her actions demonstrate that heroism knows no gender, only commitment to duty and love for those who serve beside us. The audience stood and applauded. Elena walked to the podium to accept the award. She looked out at the crowd and saw the faces of the soldiers she had rescued. They had come from across the country to be here, to honor the pilot who had saved their lives. She saw Private Henderson, now Sergeant Henderson, standing in his dress uniform. She saw Sergeant Torres, walking without a limp now, his wife Maria beside him. She saw Chief Warrant Officer Harrison, retired now but still standing tall. And she saw her parents, her father wiping tears from his eyes, her mother beaming with pride. Elena stepped to the microphone. "Thank you for this honor," she said, her voice steady. "But I want to be clear about something. I'm not a hero because I'm a woman who flew helicopters. I'm not a hero because I defied orders or because I survived dangerous missions. If I'm a hero at all, it's because when soldiers needed help, I answered. That's what we all do in the military. We answer the call." She paused, looking at the rescued soldiers. The real heroes are the men and women who fight on the ground, who face danger every day, who trust that when they need help, someone will come for them. I was just the pilot. They were the ones who held that ridgeline, who protected each other, who refused to give up. Any one of them would have done what I did if our positions had been reversed. The soldiers in the audience stood and saluted her. Elena saluted back, tears streaming down her face. "Leave no one behind," she said softly. "That's our promise to each other. That's what defines us, and that's why I flew that night. Because soldiers were in danger, and we don't leave our people behind. Ever." The applause was thunderous.